Imagine holding $180 billion in cash, just sitting there.
It's a number that's almost hard to conceptualize, really.
Right, like you could buy outright. I think the math is like 440 of the companies in the S&P 500. Just buy them.
Yeah, or, single-handedly fund the GDP of a mid-sized country.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But if you're Alphabet and it's mid-March 2026, you don't do any of that. You decide to spend it all in a single calendar year just pouring concrete, securing nuclear energy contracts, and buying up silicon chips.
Just to win this sort of invisible planetary scale war.
Yeah, it's wild. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. I'm your host, and as always, I've got our resident tech and financial expert here with me to unpack all this.
Glad to be here. And man, we have a lot of ground to cover today.
We really do. For you listening, our mission today is very specific. We've got this massive stack of financial, strategic, and legal research from early 2026.
Basically trying to make sense of Alphabet's completely record-breaking fiscal 2025.
All right, ticker symbol GOGL. But we're looking at these massive numbers against the backdrop of two earth-shattering forces.
The first being that jaw-dropping $180 billion CapEx plan we just mentioned.
And the second being the very real, existential threat of a Department of Justice breakup.
So we're getting into all of it.
I think to really grasp the magnitude of where Alphabet sits today, we kind of have to, we have to rewind to the sentiment of 2023 and 2024.
Oh, man. The absolute panic. Wall Street was losing its collective mind.
Completely. The prevailing narrative back then was, generative AI chatbots were the asteroid and Google search was the dinosaur.
The disruption narrative was so incredibly loud, everyone thought the Blue Link search model was just dead.
Right. The consensus was that their primary cash cow was marked for imminent death. People assumed users would just ask a chatbot a question, get an answer, and literally never click an ad again.
But I mean, the data sitting in front of us now in early 2026 tells a totally inverted story, doesn't it? It really does. Alphabet didn't just survive the whole chatbot panic. Their stock surged 65.3% in 2025 alone.
Wow.
Yeah. And by this month, March 2026, they hit a staggering $3.77 trillion market cap.
Wait, 3.7 trillion? So that's...
The 102% year-over-year increase. It's insane. Institutional investors are now officially categorizing them as a, quote, full-stack AI powerhouse.
So, okay, let's unpack this. How does a company that everyone assumed was on the brink of obsolescence just post a $400 billion revenue year?
To understand how they're funding this whole sci-fi future, we have to look at how they defended their frontline fortress, which is Google services.
Because the whole cannibalization myth, the idea that AI was going to eat their ad revenue, it didn't just fail to happen, it got obliterated.
Totally obliterated. Let's just look at the mechanics of why that myth fell apart. So Q4 2025, Google services revenue hit $95.9 billion.
Almost $100 billion in a single quarter.
Right, which is a 14% growth year over year. And search alone brought in $63.1 billion of that, growing at 17%.
So ad demand didn't vanish at all.
No, it actually intensified, especially in the retail sector. The reason the cannibalization theory failed is that it just fundamentally misunderstood human behavior.
Because it assumed people only search for, trivia, who was the 14th president, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But people search to take action. And the way they take action has totally shifted.
Yeah, the sources point out something fascinating. 1 in 6 AI mode queries are now non-text.
Right, meaning people are just using their cameras or their voices instead of typing.
And the craziest example of this is the circle to search feature. It just completely removes the friction between intent and discovery.
It's brilliant. You're watching a video on your phone, you see a piece of furniture you like, you don't open a browser or try to describe it in a text box.
You literally just drag your finger in a circle around the couch in the video.
Exactly. And the multimodal AI instantly identifies it, maps it to a retailer, and surfaces it for you. That feature alone is active on 580 million Android devices globally right now.
580 million. That adoption rate is just terrifyingly fast. But here's my question with this.
Sure.
If I'm just drawing the circle on a video and I'm not typing a keyword into a search bar, how is Google actually making money off that? How do you monetize a circle?
That is where the real engineering genius of their new ad stack comes in. They deployed this thing called the Universal Commerce Protocol.
Universal Commerce Protocol, okay.
Yeah, which is designed to handle what they're calling agentic commerce. And layered on top of that is a marketer tool called AI Max.
How does AI Max differ from the old way of doing things?
Well, think about the legacy ad model.
Right, the old pay-per-click thing. I bid on a keyword, write a text ad, and just pray someone clicks it.
Exactly, it was static, right?
Yeah.
Highly dependent on exact keyword matching. AI Max just completely destroys that old paradigm.
How so? Give me an example.
So let's say you're a mid-market e-commerce brand selling high-end running gear. You don't bid on keywords anymore, at all.
Oh, wow. So what do?
You just feed your entire product catalog, your margin targets, and your inventory levels directly into AI Max.
You just hand it all over to the AI.
Right. So when a user circles a pair of running shoes in, say, a fitness influencer's video,
AI Max analyzes that visual data.
yes, and it cross-references it with the user's geolocation, like say they're near a popular running trail.
Oh, that's wild.
And instantly, it dynamically generates a personalized, highly relevant shopping unit right there in the visual search results.
Wait, so the ad isn't even pre-written?
Nope.
The AI is literally constructing the advertisement in real time to match the exact context of the user's query.
Exactly. It creates this hyper-contextualized, subtle ad inventory out of thin air. It doesn't even look like a banner ad.
It probably just looks like a super helpful personalized recommendation.
Which is why it converts so well. It allows Google to monetize spaces and interactions that were previously unmonetizable. It locks both the consumer and the advertiser way deeper into the ecosystem.
Okay, I have a major pushback here, though.
Let's hear it.
We have to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Microsoft.
Look at Bing.
Yeah, Microsoft integrated ChatGPT into Bing way back in, early 2023?
Yeah, early 2023.
They had the ultimate first-mover advantage in generative AI search. They poured tens of billions of dollars into OpenAI.
They did.
So if this new AI-driven search is really so revolutionary, why didn't Bing just steal massive market share while Google was still fumbling around figuring out its Gemini models?
It's a great question, but the data on this is incredibly definitive. Q1 2026 metrics show Google's global search market share remains utterly dominant at 91.4%.
91.4%, so it didn't budge.
Barely moved. In the US, it held steady between 84% and 86%. Bing, despite billions in investment, is sitting at roughly 4% globally.
What about Perplexity? They were the big darling of Silicon Valley.
Complexity AI is at just 1.1%.
Wow, so why did Bing fail to capitalize on that massive first-mover advantage?
It really comes down to two things: the depth of Google's data moat and the reality of local intent.
The data moat, meaning the decades of them knowing exactly what a user wants before they even finish typing.
Exactly. But more specifically, it's the integration of geolocation signals. A massive portion of global search volume is deeply local.
Right, like plumber near me, or is the pharmacy open right now?
Coffee shop with wifey, exactly.
Okay.
Google has over 2 decades of hyperlocal behavioral data tied into Google Maps.
Ah, right, so an LLM can write a beautiful poem about a plumber.
But it cannot reliably predict which local plumber actually answers their phone on a Sunday afternoon.
I see. It's like having the smartest theoretical physicist in the world, but they don't know the bus schedule in your neighborhood.
That is a perfect analogy. You don't need theoretical physics to get to work. You need the bus schedule.
And Google has the bus schedule.
They own the bus schedule. And from an advertiser's perspective, that is everything. If a brand is deploying a $50 million ad budget, they demand a guaranteed ROI.
And Google's predictive models for ad conversion are just frighteningly accurate because they own that entire behavioral pipeline.
Exactly,
Right.
which is why projections show Google pulling in $160 billion in search ad revenue in 2026 alone.
$160 billion just from search ads.
Yeah.
Which really proves a fundamental truth for you listening. Whether you're building a business or just managing a portfolio, consumer muscle memory is profoundly sticky.
It really is.
The inertia of typing Google or now just circling an image on an Android phone, it cannot be easily broken just because a competitor launches a clever chatbot.
And that stickiness translates directly to their subscription models, too. The source material highlights that YouTube subscriptions, platforms, and devices brought in $13.6 billion in Q4.
$13.6 billion, that's a big jump.
It's a 17% jump, yeah, fueled by 325 million paying subscribers across the ecosystem.
And a huge driver of that has to be the Google One AI plan, right?
Oh, absolutely. They basically took their most advanced model, Gemini Advanced, and bundled it with your cloud storage.
It's so smart. Because once you upload your terabytes of family photos and you integrate Gemini into your Gmail and Docs workflows,
The switching costs become astronomically high. You're never going to leave.
The churn rate just drops to near zero.
Exactly. It's the ultimate walled garden, heavily fortified by pure utility. But, as vital as search and subscriptions are, they really only tell the story of Alphabet defending its legacy.
Right, defending the fortress.
Yeah. When you actually read the Q4 2025 earnings call transcript, the advertising business was treated almost as a footnote by the institutional analysts.
Wait, really? A footnote?
Yeah, because the actual earthquake, the metric that really sent the stock surging, was the sudden, violent maturation of Alphabet's second engine.
Okay, let's talk about that second engine, the infrastructure layer, Google Cloud.
Right.
For a decade, Google Cloud Platform, or GCP, was essentially taking the bronze medal. They were a distant third behind Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure.
They burned billions of dollars for years just trying to keep pace.
But the Q4 numbers show a massive inflection point.
A huge one. They hit this strategic threshold that analysts call break-even and hypergrowth.
Break-even and hypergrowth. Let's dig into the numbers there.
So GCP posted a record $17.7 billion in Q4 revenue.
$17.7 billion in one quarter.
Which is a 48% explosion year over year. To contextualize that, they are now running at a $70 billion annualized run rate.
That is massive.
Yeah.
But the revenue is almost secondary to the profitability here, right?
Exactly. Operating profit for cloud surged 150% to $5.3 billion.
I need to pause on this because the margin expansion is just wild to me.
It's incredible.
They went from a 17.5% operating margin to a 30.1% margin in a business defined by physical hardware.
Yeah, we're talking about millions of square feet of data centers.
Right. Industrial cooling systems, subsea fiber optic cables. How on earth does a company magically extract an extra 13% of pure profit margin that quickly on physical infrastructure?
It's not magic, it's just the brutal mathematics of physical scaling.
Okay, explain that.
Cloud computing is a game of massive upfront capital expenditure. You have to lay the global fiber network, pour the concrete, and install the server racks long before the first enterprise customer signs a contract.
So you're spending billions before you make a dime.
Exactly. So for 10 years, Google was absorbing these massive depreciation hits on half-empty data centers.
So they were basically paying the full mortgage on an apartment building that was only like 30% occupied.
That is precisely it. But once you cross a certain utilization threshold, the economics totally flip.
Because the building is finally full.
Yes. The marginal cost of adding the next 1,000 enterprise customers onto existing paid-for infrastructure is incredibly low. So by late 2025, they finally filled the apartment building. The revenue scaled exponentially, the fixed costs stabilized, and you get that violent margin expansion to 30.1%.
And the tenants aren't just moving in. There's a massive wait list.
A huge wait list.
Yeah. The sources note their cloud backlog, which represents contracts signed where the services haven't actually been delivered or recognized as revenue, yet hit $240 billion.
$240 billion. It's staggering.
That's up 55% sequentially from the prior quarter alone. Why is everyone suddenly migrating to GCP right now?
Because of their vertically optimized AI stack. The data shows 75% of GCP customers are utilizing Google's AI infrastructure.
So they aren't just storing data anymore.
No, they are no longer just renting raw storage space. They are renting the compute power to train their own models using Vertex AI and Gemini to build proprietary corporate applications.
Got it.
GCP is currently the only big three hyperscaler growing significantly faster than the overall 30% market rate. They hold roughly 11% to 14% of the market now, and they are aggressively stealing territory.
Which perfectly explains the $32 billion elephant in the room.
The Wiz acquisition.
Yes. On March 11, 2026, Google executed the largest acquisition in its history. They bought this cybersecurity firm called Wiz for $32 billion in all cash.
All cash. Just wrote a check.
Which is insane. Now, Google Cloud already had native security tools, right? I mean, they bought Mandiant just a few years ago.
They did, yeah.
So why drop $32 billion on Wiz?
To understand this, we really have to look at the CNAPP market.
CNAPP?
Yeah, the Cloud Native Application Protection Platform sector. Enterprise security is projected to be a $40 billion market by 2030.
Okay.
Wiz was founded by former Israeli intelligence officers, and it grew at an unprecedented rate to capture an 11% market share.
Why did it grow so fast?
Because they solved a very, very specific problem, securing multi-cloud environments.
Let me see if I can piece this together. Fortune 500 companies don't just use one cloud, right?
Rarely.
A major bank might keep its legacy databases on AWS, run its consumer apps on Azure, and then do its machine learning over on Google Cloud.
Exactly. And securing data that constantly moves across 3 different rival platforms is just an operational nightmare.
So what does Wiz do?
Wiz built a unified security layer that sits on top of all of them, providing total visibility.
I see.
By acquiring Wiz, Google instantly upgrades its own native security, which removes any hesitation that bank might have about migrating highly sensitive workloads to GCP.
But wait, hold on. If Wiz is actively securing the multi-cloud environments of thousands of enterprises,
Yeah.
and it sits on top of AWS and Azure, then by owning Wiz, doesn't Google effectively buy a backdoor view into the architecture of their rivals' deployments?
It's a Trojan horse.
It is. You buy the security company that guards your competitor's fortress, and suddenly you know exactly how the fortress is built and who's living inside it.
It is arguably one of the most brilliant offensive-defensive maneuvers in enterprise tech history.
Wow.
By owning Wiz, Google gains unparalleled granular visibility into how the world's largest companies are utilizing competitor platforms.
So they can see the inefficiencies in a client's AWS deployment and then just directly pitch them a more efficient GCP alternative.
Exactly.
I cannot imagine global regulators just looked at a $32 billion Trojan horse and waved it through.
Oh, they absolutely did not. The European Commission scrutinized this relentlessly.
I bet.
They only approved the deal in February 2026 under incredibly strict conditions.
What kind of conditions?
The primary stipulation was that Google cannot degrade Wiz's functionality for AWS or Azure users. It has to remain an open, platform-agnostic tool.
Which Google Cloud CEO Thomas Kurian immediately agreed to, right?
He did.
Because our sources mention he framed it as making security an innovation catalyst.
Yes. Because Kurian understands that keeping Wiz open actually serves Google's grand strategy perfectly.
How so?
They want Alphabet to be the protective security layer over the entire enterprise internet, regardless of whose servers are actually running the compute.
It normalizes Google's presence in literally every IT department on Earth.
Exactly.
So GCP is printing money at a 30% margin. They have a $240 billion backlog, and they just bought the master key to enterprise security. It sounds like this unstoppable compounding machine.
It really does.
But to fuel this machine, Alphabet had to make a financial commitment that literally sent shockwaves through the market.
Yeah, this is where the narrative really pivots from triumph to high-stakes gambling.
Let's set the scene for this, because it's wild. It's the Q4 earnings call. CFO Anand Ashkenazi takes the microphone to provide the forward guidance for fiscal 2026 capital expenditures.
Right.
The consensus among Wall Street analysts, the baseline expectation was that Alphabet would spend roughly $119.5 billion building out infrastructure.
Which is already a massive number.
A huge number. But instead, Ashkenazi casually announces a CapEx guidance of $175 to $185 billion.
And the stock just immediately drops over 3% in after-hours trading.
The market reaction was so visceral because the number is almost incomprehensible.
It breaks traditional financial modeling.
Think about the physical reality of $180 billion. If you think about the architecture of your own company, every time you run a query or generate a report with AI or analyze a data set, you are triggering a physical reaction in a data center somewhere.
Yes.
Alphabet isn't just buying servers with this money. They are building the factories that house the servers. They're laying the global networking cables under the oceans to connect them.
And perhaps most crucially, securing the energy grids to power them.
Right. You can't just plug $180 billion worth of AI chips into the standard local power grid.
You absolutely cannot. Alphabet specifically detailed that 40% of this CapEx is dedicated to physical infrastructure.
So concrete cooling systems.
And massive energy procurement. We are talking about locking in, right, it creates what analysts term margin compression headwinds.
Explain that for the listeners.
If a server has a useful life of, say, 5 years, you recognize a portion of that cost as an expense every single quarter for 5 years.
Okay.
Because Alphabet has been ramping up the spending so aggressively since 2023, the bill is finally coming due.
It's catching up to them.
Exactly. In 2025 alone, their depreciation expenses rose 38% to $21.1 billion.
And Ashkenazi warned that this depreciation drag will increase significantly throughout 2026.
Which is the crux of the issue.
Analysts from Barclays and Deutsche Bank are looking at the math and realizing that even with GCP's incredible 30% margins, the sheer crushing weight of depreciating $180 billion worth of concrete and silicon is going to eat into the net income.
It creates tremendous short-term pressure on the balance sheet.
Which begs the analytical question, really, why do it?
Right, why take the hit?
Is Alphabet's leadership simply gripped by AI FOMO? Like the fear of missing out because OpenAI and Microsoft are pushing the boundary so hard, are they just panic buying GPUs?
I don't buy the panic theory. Not at all.
Neither do I. When you look at their custom silicon strategy, this feels incredibly deliberate.
Absolutely. They are designing their own chips, the tensor processing units, or TPUs.
I'd argue this isn't FOMO. This is a highly calculated war of attrition.
Oh, war of attrition, yes.
By setting the table stakes at $180 billion, Alphabet is basically looking at the rest of the tech industry and saying, we have more cash than you, and we're going to literally bury you in infrastructure.
That is the construction of the economic moat.
Exactly.
If the annual cost to remain competitive in foundational model training reaches $180 billion, the list of companies that can physically afford to play the game shrinks to 3.
Alphabet, Microsoft, and maybe Amazon or Meta.
Right. Tier 2 competitors are just completely priced out. They can't even sit at the table.
And it guarantees supply chain dominance, too.
Mm.
They aren't just relying on NVIDIA.
No, they are building their own TPUs while simultaneously integrating the new NVIDIA Vera Rubin platform GPUs into their data centers.
So they're ensuring that no matter how much compute power the world demands, Alphabet will never face a bottleneck.
They are willing to endure severe short-term margin compression because the alternative is unacceptable.
Which is losing control.
Exactly. If you lose control of the infrastructure layer in the AI era, you lose everything. They are buying the right to dictate the rules of the ecosystem for the next 50 years.
But, infrastructure is only valuable if the software running on it justifies the cost.
Right.
You don't spend $180 billion on nuclear-powered data centers just to run a slightly faster chatbot that writes sea shanties.
No, the models have to evolve fundamentally.
Which brings us to the technological roadmap for 2026 and the shift toward what Alphabet calls agentic autonomy.
This is where things get really sci-fi.
So throughout 2025, the focus was deeply on efficiency, right?
Yes. They managed to drop the serving unit costs for AI queries by a staggering 78%.
A 78% reduction in cost per query. Is that purely hardware optimization?
It's a synergy of hardware and software. It's squeezing maximum utilization out of the TPUs, combined with architectural optimizations in the Gemini models themselves.
So routing simpler queries to smaller, cheaper models in the background.
Exactly. But as you noted, efficiency only gets you so far. The true paradigm shift began in February 2026 with the release of 2 distinct models.
Gemini 3.1 Pro and, more importantly, Gemini 3 DeepThink.
DeepThink, yes.
The sources describe this as PhD-level reasoning. And the most fascinating characteristic of this model is its latency.
It is intentionally slow.
Right. We are so conditioned to expect instant gratification from AI. You ask a standard large language model a question, and it instantly streams text back to you.
Because it relies on next token prediction. It is statistically guessing the most likely next word in a sequence.
But Gemini 3 DeepThink fundamentally changes that architecture to a tree of thought framework.
Yes.
So instead of speed chess, it's playing tournament chess.
Oh, I like that analogy.
In speed chess, you react instantly with the most statistically sound move based on board position. But in tournament chess, a grandmaster sits there for 10 minutes.
They simulate 5 moves ahead.
Exactly. They realize a specific path leads to a trap, discard that entire branch of probability, and explore a completely new strategy before they ever touch a piece.
That is the perfect mechanical analogy. DeepThink takes minutes, sometimes hours to answer.
Hours, wow.
Yeah, it tests hypotheses against its own internal logic, fact-checks its own pathways, abandons dead ends, and synthesizes highly complex data before it generates a single character of output.
Who is this actually for, then?
It is explicitly targeted at advanced scientific research, complex software architecture design, and high-level engineering tasks.
So you give it a massive, messy data set on fluid dynamics, go to lunch, and come back to a synthesized thesis.
Exactly.
That is incredible. But DeepThink was just the February release. The true holy grail, the model that the $180 billion capex is truly building toward for late 2026, is Gemini 4.
Yes, and the defining concept here is agentic autonomy.
Powered by autonomous workflow agents.
AWAs. This is where AI transitions from being a conversational interface to an autonomous digital worker.
Let's ground this for the listener. Think about how you use AI today. It's highly transactional.
You prompt it replies.
Right. Draft an email to my team about Q3 sales.
Right.
It drafts the text. You copy the text, open your email client, paste it, add the recipients, attach the spreadsheet, and hit send.
You are the manager micromanaging every single step of a very limited assistant.
But agentic autonomy changes that fundamental relationship.
Under the Gemini 4 paradigm, you provide an objective, not a prompt.
An objective.
Right. You say, prepare a market entry analysis for launching our new logistics software in Japan, and brief the executive team.
And then what?
Gemini 4 will autonomously query your secure internal company databases to understand your current software architecture.
On its own.
Yes. It will browse the live internet to analyze Japanese competitors and regulatory environments. It will synthesize that data, open Google Slides, draft a 20-page presentation with generated charts.
Oh my God.
Open Gmail, draft the briefing, attach the slides, and schedule the meeting on Google Calendar, all completely autonomously from a single command.
It is taking definitive action across multiple distinct applications.
Yeah.
But structurally, how is it able to keep all of that straight without hallucinating or losing the plot halfway through the task?
It requires massive context window.
Context window.
The context window is the active memory of the AI measured in tokens, which are essentially fragments of words or data.
Early chatbots could remember, what, a few thousand tokens?
Maybe a few pages of text, yeah. But Gemini 4 is designed to hold millions, potentially tens of millions of tokens in its active memory simultaneously.
Which means?
It means it can hold an entire corporate code base, a library of legal documents, and a 2-hour video in its brain at the exact same time.
Allowing it to execute these massive multi-step workflows without forgetting the original objective.
Precisely.
And there's a brilliant operational detail in the research that proves Google has been planning this exact workflow takeover for a long time.
Oh, the assistant delay.
Yes, they officially delayed killing off the legacy Google Assistant until March 2026.
Right.
They kept the old clunky voice assistant alive, specifically to give third-party developers more time to prepare their APIs, their application programming interfaces, for this new autonomous workflow era.
They are fundamentally rewiring the Android operating system and the Chrome browser.
So that Gemini 4 has the digital hands to reach into different apps and push the buttons for you.
It is an operating system level reinvention.
It's just wild. But while we were discussing autonomy, we cannot ignore the physical manifestation of Alphabet's AI capabilities.
Waymo.
Waymo. Autonomy isn't just executing workflows on a screen, it is navigating 2-ton vehicles through complex urban environments.
And Waymo's breakout quarter was stunning.
Q4 revenue hit $370 million.
They are now operating 400,000 PED trips a week.
With over 20 million fully autonomous trips completed. No human safety drivers.
And they just launched Miami as their 6th full-service market.
What is most interesting about Waymo from an analyst's perspective is this bizarre accounting paradox it created in Q4.
Oh, the SBC hit. This is fascinating.
Explain this because it's a bit in the weeds.
Yeah.
Waymo proved its commercial viability and its safety metrics so definitively that it was able to raise an additional $16 billion in private funding rounds.
Which you would assume is fantastic news. A subsidiary raising massive capital.
Right.
It is excellent for long-term value creation. However, this massive influx of external capital caused Waymo's internal valuation to spike dramatically.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because Alphabet compensates many Waymo engineers and executives with stock-based compensation SBC tied to Waymo's valuation.
Right.
Accounting rules dictate that Alphabet must mark up the value of that compensation on their balance sheet.
So because Waymo became so much more valuable, the stock they promised their employees suddenly cost the company significantly more on paper.
Exactly. This dynamic actually resulted in a $2.1 billion non-cash penalty to Alphabet's Q4 operating margins.
Wow. It is the definition of a good problem to have.
It really is.
But it beautifully illustrates the sheer financial complexity of managing these futuristic moonshots when they transition from R&D projects to commercially viable, hyper-growth businesses.
It's a whole new tier of accounting complexity.
So let's pull all these threads together. Alphabet in early 2026 is a behemoth.
Truly.
They have a search monopoly that is successfully transitioning to visual and agentic commerce. They have a hyper-profitable cloud business growing at 48% with a 30% margin.
Yep.
They are deploying $180 billion to build an insurmountable physical infrastructure moat. They're launching AI models capable of PhD-level reasoning and cross-app autonomy.
And they have a fleet of robotaxis actively generating revenue in major American cities.
Exactly. By every traditional metric, they are financially and technologically invincible.
By every traditional metric, yes. But they do not exist in a vacuum.
Right, because hovering directly over their Mountain View headquarters is a massive existential storm cloud.
United States government.
Yes. This brings us to Section 5, the DOJ antitrust litigation and the Apple decoupling.
This legal reality is really the invisible ceiling on Alphabet's valuation.
It is the reason their stock, despite the massive growth, often trades at a relative discount compared to a pure-play software company that doesn't carry this regulatory baggage.
We must lay out the precise legal timeline here.
Right. So in August 2024, U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta handed down a historic landmark ruling. Google is an illegal monopoly in the search market.
But Judge Mehta didn't immediately order the company to be carved up into pieces, right?
No. There was a distinct separation between finding them guilty of monopoly behavior and deciding how to actually punish them.
Correct. The trial moved into the remedies phase throughout late 2025.
And what happened in that phase?
During this phase, Judge Mehta opted for what are called behavioral remedies. He rejected the DOJ's initial aggressive demand to force Alphabet to sell off the Chrome browser.
Okay, so they get to keep Chrome.
Yes. Instead, he ordered that Google must face annual transparent rebidding for default search placement on all mobile devices.
Annual rebidding.
And crucially, they must share aspects of their search index data with competitors to lower the barrier to entry.
Which, frankly, for a $3.7 trillion company, sounds like a regulatory parking ticket.
It really does.
It forces them to change some internal practices, but it leaves the profit engine fundamentally intact.
And that is exactly why the government refused to accept it.
Oh, right.
In February 2026, the Department of Justice, joined by a coalition of 35 state attorneys general, formally appealed the remedies decision.
They weren't satisfied with behavioral remedies.
No. They argued vehemently that behavioral remedies are completely insufficient to restore competition to a market this entrenched. They are aggressively demanding structural remedies from the appellate court.
Structural meaning physical divestiture.
Yes. They are explicitly demanding the forced spin-off of Chrome, turning it into an independent company.
Wow.
And perhaps most impactfully, they're demanding a total permanent legal ban on the Apple default contract.
Okay, we have to unpack this Apple contract because the economics of it represent the most fascinating counterintuitive paradox in modern business.
It's amazing.
Let's explain how this works. Alphabet pays Apple an exorbitant amount of money referred to as traffic acquisition costs, or TAC, simply to be the default search engine out of the box on the Safari browser.
Right. You buy an iPhone, you open Safari, you type a query, it defaults to Google.
And the toll Google pays for that privilege is staggering. Estimates place that annual payment to Apple somewhere between $20 and $26 billion a year.
That is pure 100% margin profit handed directly to Apple.
To put the scale in perspective, that single TAC payment represents roughly 25% of Alphabet's total global operating profit.
So Google is handing over a quarter of its profits just to ensure they capture the iPhone demographic.
But here is the paradox.
Okay.
Let's say the DOJ wins the appeal. The court bangs the gavel and makes it illegal for Google to pay Apple this money.
Right.
The intent is to break the monopoly by allowing Apple to default to Bing or forcing a choice screen on users.
Yes, that's the DOJ's goal.
But let's look at the behavioral economics we discussed earlier regarding circle to search and brand loyalty. The muscle memory of Google is absolute.
It really is.
If I buy a new iPhone and Safari defaults to a competitor, I'm going to spend exactly 30 seconds downloading the standalone Google app or manually diving into my settings to change the default back to Google.
Which leads us directly to the upside risk scenario.
Upside risk. Tell me about that.
It is a concept that has Wall Street analysts deeply fascinated right now. Financial models from institutions like Barclays and Jefferies have stress-tested this exact outcome.
And what did they find?
If the DOJ successfully bans the $26 billion payment, it might inadvertently result in the greatest financial windfall Alphabet could possibly receive.
Because if 80% or 90% of iPhone users manually revert to Google out of sheer preference for the superior product,
Google retains the vast majority of the search volume.
they keep the user data, they serve the same ads, they collect the same ad revenue.
But suddenly, they no longer have to pay the $26 billion toll to Apple.
The irony is just profound.
It is. The DOJ intends this structural remedy as a severe punishment to fracture a monopoly. But the practical reality of consumer preference means the government might accidentally hand Google an extra $26 billion a year in free cash flow.
Jefferies calculates that Apple could actually see its own pre-tax profits plunge by as much as 7% if this frictionless revenue stream evaporates.
Meanwhile, Alphabet gets to take that retained $26 billion and funnel it directly into Gemini 5 development.
Or use it to offset the massive depreciation headwinds from their $180 billion capex build.
Exactly.
Now, to be absolutely clear to you, the listener, we are analyzing this purely through the lens of market mechanics and financial strategy.
Yes, we are impartially reporting the data.
We take no position on whether the DOJ should break up Google or whether their market dominance is fundamentally harmful or beneficial to technological innovation.
That is a vital debate for lawmakers and regulators.
Right. Our focus is strictly on how these legal maneuvers impact the corporate entity and the broader tech landscape. And the financial reality is that losing this specific battle might ironically make Alphabet richer.
However, we must caveat that this Apple paradox is just one front in a multi-front legal war.
Oh, right.
There is a completely separate, equally dangerous antitrust trial that concluded in late 2025 under U.S. District Judge Leonie Brinkema.
And this trial did not focus on search, right?
It focused on ad tech.
The plumbing of the digital advertising ecosystem.
Precisely, the invisible marketplace where publishers sell ad space and advertisers buy it.
The DOJ's core allegation in this trial is that Google illegally controls every side of the transaction. They represent the buyer, they represent the seller, and they own the exchange where the transaction happens.
And a ruling from Judge Brinkema is expected imminently.
And if she rules against them and demands structural remedies there.
If the judge forces Google to divest its sell-side ad tools, it directly threatens the Google Network segment of their balance sheet.
How big is that segment?
That segment generates roughly $30 billion annually.
$30 billion?
Yeah. While losing ad tech wouldn't be as catastrophic as losing the core search engine, a forced divestiture of their advertising stack would trigger a structural earthquake across the internet.
It would rewrite the fundamental economics of digital publishing globally.
It absolutely would.
So the legal landscape is fraught with landmines, even if some of those landmines might secretly be filled with gold.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Which brings us to our final synthesis. How is the broader market digesting this unprecedented cocktail of factors?
It's a lot to take in.
You have a company posting $400 billion in revenue, terrifying the market with a $180 billion capex plan, navigating sci-fi AI transitions, and fighting off the full weight of the federal government.
The market is digesting it with remarkable, almost defiant optimism.
Defiant optimism.
Yes. Despite the very real margin pressures from the infrastructure build, and despite the looming appellate court rulings, the consensus among Tier 1 analysts remains a strong buy.
The valuation metrics reflect that premium too. Alphabet currently trades at a forward price-to-earnings ratio of 29.61.
Right.
And if you look historically, their 5-year average PE hovers around 22.24. Yeah, so investors are paying a distinct premium right now compared to the company's own historical baseline.
They are happily paying that premium because the market has fundamentally re-rated the stock.
Re-rated it how?
Investors are no longer valuing Alphabet as just a highly profitable advertising utility. They are valuing it as the foundational infrastructure of the future digital economy.
Wow.
Scotiabank recently issued a wildly bullish note, raising its price target for GOGL to $400 a share.
$400 a share. That implies they believe the $3.7 trillion valuation still has massive room to run.
Scotiabank explicitly cited the hypergrowth metrics of Google Cloud, the 30% margin expansion, and the unparalleled free cash flow generation that allows them to fund the Wiz acquisition entirely in cash without blinking.
Even historically conservative institutions like UBS have nudged their price targets upward.
The market has collectively accepted a new reality. The $180 billion capital expenditure is not reckless spending.
Yep.
It is simply the mandatory price of admission to rule the next decade.
It represents a profound shift in corporate identity. Alphabet has successfully transitioned from being a tool you use to find a local plumber into a global, planetary-scale intelligence grid.
They are building the cognitive utility of the 21st century.
And they have proven their operational resilience. Let's not forget, just 2 years ago, they faced the greatest existential technological threat in their history.
Right, the generative AI boom was supposed to render their core product obsolete.
Instead, they absorbed the shock, co-opted the technology, and integrated it so deeply into their ecosystem that it actually increased user engagement.
They proved that the depth of their data moat and the stickiness of consumer habits are far more powerful than the initial shock and awe of a competitor's shiny new tool.
Which brings us back to the premise we started with. Analyzing a company operating at this scale is no longer a simple exercise in reading a balance sheet.
The diagnostic landscape is murky and incredibly complex.
You have massive, record-breaking revenues, masking terrifying infrastructure expenditures. You have AI models that take minutes to think, autonomous agents poised to hijack our workflows.
And legal threats designed to destroy the company that might accidentally make them more profitable.
It requires a holistic, multidisciplinary approach. You cannot understand Alphabet today by just looking at advertising yields.
You really can't.
You have to analyze their custom silicon fabrication pipelines, the architecture of multi-cloud security environments, the behavioral economics of default settings.
And the literal logistics of pouring concrete and securing nuclear energy all simultaneously.
Alphabet has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it can survive and even dominate technological paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
It swatted away the initial ChatGPT panic. It completely reinvented its profit engines with the violent rise of Google Cloud, and it is actively charting a course toward an era of agentic autonomy.
They really are.
But as we watch this historic DOJ appeal unfold throughout the rest of 2026, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
It's a big one.
When a company becomes a $3.7 trillion planetary infrastructure, when it controls the subsea fiber cables, designs the custom silicon, trains the autonomous AI agents, and owns the cybersecurity protocols guarding its own rivals.
Yeah.
Is its greatest threat actually technological disruption from a nimble, brilliant startup in a garage? Or is the ultimate final threat simply being too big and too powerful to be legally allowed to exist?
That is the defining regulatory and economic question for the next decade of the tech industry.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.